greetings there, everybody. It is GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. What we are looking at right here, this is going to be the beginning of our non-canon parallel episode list. So yes, we're reaching into the world of Warcraft material, but we're also going to look at the things which are either outside of the timeline or considered non-canon, have an indeterminate timeline, or just things that are smaller, in-game lore. So there's just various things we're going to look at that have, for the most part, everything will have been covered in other material. This will just be a different way of looking at it. So the way we're going to start this is with the Warcraft role-playing game. Basically, this is like the game manual, the player's handbook. They don't really call it the campaign setting. So there's a couple reasons why. One, it's Warcraft. We're going to look at everything Warcraft on this channel, and I have promised that since the beginning, and I'm going to, anything I find that's Warcraft related, we're going to look at it. Two, okay, this is both a pro and a con, or a for and against doing this. There have been various people within Blizzard, the organization, the World of Warcraft team, that have made comments about materials like the World of Warcraft role-playing game and anything that's written in the books. So one of them, or some of the things I've read have said, no, this is not canon. You can't just take it with a grain of salt. Okay. But also, I believe Chris Metzen and some other people have basically said this stuff was written with our blessing, and anything that was written with our blessing is to be considered enriching the Warcraft universe, and heck yeah, consider it canon. So what we're going to do is go through these various things. We're not going to cover this entire book in one. It's broken up into 6 chapters, and we're not going to read it verbatim page for page. So stay a while and listen as we begin the Warcraft role-playing game campaign setting. Now it says revised 3rd edition. I don't think this is the 3rd edition of this. If you look at it, it's Dungeons and Dragons. So this is a 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons campaign setting, which I can't believe. I don't know where this was in my life that I missed out on this, because I love Warcraft and I'm a huge D&D player. So the fact that this slipped through the cracks and I didn't see, just unforgettable. We're going to look at it now. What we are going to do is just skim through anything lore related, flavor text related. We're going to go through, and we're just going to kind of note what we see. So let's come along for the ride here. First thing that we can see is the map. Very basic map. We have Kazan, or Kazan. Obviously that gets moved later on, I think up around here, or it's sunk. That's the Goblin. The Tanaris Desert exists at this point in time. So does the Ungoro Crater. Thunder Bluff, Orgrimmar, Mount Hyjal. Now Nighthaven, that, if it exists, I think it's moved. Mulgore Dorotar. We do have Northrend with Azul Narub. Ice Crown. Looks like the page of this, whoever copied this. Glacier, probably. The Maelstrom in the middle. The Broken Isles. So this is obviously written after a lot of the stuff like in Warcraft 3 has come up. Well, maybe not. Hiji. So, interesting. My guess on this is that Hiji is where the Pandaren supposedly are coming from until that gets changed. We have Cosmodon, Azeroth. At this point, Cosmodon is considered like this equal kingdom, Ironforge, Stormwind, Lordaeron, the Plague Lands, Silvermoon. So this, Quel'Thalas, this feels like after Warcraft 3. So this is a good time to have read this. We've got some neat pictures of heroes and demons. Okay, sword, sorcery. There's just some general trademark stuff. We do have a special thanks. Chris Metzen and Bob Fitch, and a few other people. And fans who never get tired of clicking on units or confirming that crit. So that's a tabletop and RTS kind of both. So this, I believe this is before World of... As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I know it is, because later on they do revamp this to address the World of Warcraft community, and we are going to get there ourselves too. We're definitely not reading through every 253 page, but we are going to look at Chapter 1, A World at War, and just see how it goes. So just take us all the way to the 31st page. We're going to see how much. It looks like it's broken down into 6 chapters. Maybe that's how I'll break the episodes down too. We do have timelines as well coming through. So let's just start with the lore. And if it starts to be too late of an episode, too long, then we'll just cut it off and pick up wherever we want. The two armies collided in the waning light of a dying sun. From her vantage point at the forest's edge, Oak Widow knelt, gripping her bow. So Oak Widow, that's a new hero's name. She had spent most of the afternoon watching the two armies gather and form up along the edges of the shallow valley. Now, beneath a red and heavy sun low on the horizon, they finally surged forward. How easy it was, the Night Elf thought, for conflagration to light from a single spark. A fragment of a rumor, a gold strike could be found within this wasted valley. Alliance and Horde adventurers rushed in, each eager to claim the place for their people, only to stumble across one another. Then they stood back as nature took its course. Distrust turning rivals into bitter enemies, small bands into organized armies, and a deserted vale into a battlefield. From her right came the orcs, thick-shouldered grunt soldiers surging down the valley like a green flesh tide. They swirled around great shamans who drew magical energies into themselves to shape bolts of power. Bull-headed taurens snorted and bellowed, towering among the shorter orcs. Mighty kodo beasts lumbered forward, drooling and lowing, while from their backs orcs thundered on their oversized war drums, driving the other warriors of the Horde into a frenzy of battle lust. This is definitely Warcraft 3 time period. On Oak Widow's left, the humans surged forward to meet the orcs, the sunset gleaming off their armor like blood. The swordsmen slogged forward through the dry grass, while a great battle shout leapt from their lips. Armored knights astride powerful destriers led the assault, and behind them came a rabble of peasants armed with whatever tools could be turned into serviceable weapons. Behind all, Alliance sorceresses ripped the air with waves of magical power. Finally, there, just cresting the hill to the rear, clattering siege engines chugged forward in a fog of foul black mist. 3 weeks previous, neither side carried anything for this dry, windswept valley. Now both Human Alliance and Orc Horde were willing to die for this land. Their previous union during the Battle of Mount Hyjal meant nothing here as the armies hurled themselves down the slopes. Oak Widow allowed herself a humorless smile, the grin tugging at the scar that ran from her forehead over a now empty eye socket and down her cheek. These groups' rivalries were deep pools indeed, so very easily brought to a boil. Even now they would seize the last rays of the day to battle one another rather than suffer a single night with enemies in close proximity. The two armies slammed against one another in waves of steel and green flesh. The ground shook from the impact of their blows. The cries of battle became shouts of pain as sword bit into flesh, as mace crushed bone, and as eldritch spell energy cleansed the living skin from its targets. An explosion erupted from the rear of the Alliance army's ranks as one of the siege engines fell to enemy spellcasting. Shards of hot metal rained down, and the surrounding forces responded with screams of pain and cries of dismay. Screams now from the orc side as well. A shaman's bodyguard was stripped away, and waves of arrows streaked the shaman like 100 deadly insects. Bristling like thistledown, the spellcaster pitched forward and was lost to view. Back in the valley center, the neat battle lines degenerated into a myriad of deadly melees. A Tauren warrior unhorsed a mounted knight. A wedge of armed peasants followed a paladin warrior as he drove deeply into the horde, only to disappear screaming beneath a wave of green muscle and bloodied swords. Along the top of the Alliance's ridgeline, dull, flat thunderings told Oak Widow that dwarven mortars were in position. Confusion and death fell upon the orc forces. Maddened by the smoke, noise, and pain, one of the kodo beasts went berserk, drums and drummer falling beneath its heavy gallop as it left a path of smashed allies and enemies to flee the field of battle. Oak Widow watched with her one good eye as Alliance and Horde ripped at one another. The Night Elves cared little enough for mining gold, but they did not avoid this vale due to lack of interest. A great demon was felled here. Its corruption left an abiding taint, stirring thoughts of bloodlust in any who entered the valley. Oak Widow had warned of this. Her people were ostensibly aligned with the humans, yet the young race was brash and did not listen to wisdom. Now they clashed with the orcs in an orgy of violence. Two of the combatants, each bloodied by earlier fights, fought dangerously near the Night Elf's vantage point. The human had lost his helmet, and crimson was smeared across his forehead. A dark river ran thick from a shoulder wound down the green flesh of the orc's arm. Human and orc spun, locked blade, parted, charged at each other again. The human brought his long sword in a wide sweep, and the orc blocked it with the thick-notched haft of his axe. In response, the orc lunged with a heavy overhand chop, which the human beat aside with a powerful blow of his own blade. The two were locked in a deadly dance, exchanging a battery of blows, then retreating again, once, twice, 3 times, each time weakening the other, but expending energy as well. Though death stalked the shallow veil around them, this battle seemed a draw. Then they noticed Oak Widow. First the orc shot her a glance, his thick forehead drawn in puzzlement. The human caught the look and spared a moment to see what drew his foe's gaze. The smile faded from Oak Widow's face. She rose to her feet at the edge of the forest, bow still in hand. She was the only unwounded thing on the battlefield, and as such was immediately suspect. Oops. Oh, and here we have a cool picture of that orc grunt. Who knows? The two combatants shot each other a glance, the orc's lip curling over his fangs, and the human offering a grim nod as they came to an immediate silent agreement. Battle cries burst from their throats as they leapt toward the Night Elf. Although the orc was more muscular, even clad in plates of hammered steel, the human was faster. Oak Widow concentrated on him first. She touched an amulet, and vines and roots erupted around the human in a thick tangle. The human cursed as the undergrowth clutched at him, making each step more difficult than the last. Oak Widow turned her attention to the orc, though she would not forget the human. The man was delayed, but he was not yet out of the fight. The orc found caution, turning his charge to a flanking maneuver. Oak Widow smiled. The orc had played to her strengths. With a short prayer to Elune, the moon goddess, Oak Widow raised her bow and loosed an arrow, then a second and a third. The prayer empowered each shot, and the arrows burst into flame in a series of miniature fireballs. Cursing, the orc lunged to one side. The first arrows streaked past him in a trail of acrid smoke, but the second and third found their mark. The orc warrior howled as the mystic flame, blessed by the moon goddess herself, spread over his form as if he were coated with oil. Dropping his axe and beating his arms wildly in a vain attempt to still the blaze, the orc fell just moments later. The sharp stench of burning meat joined the tang of spent gunpowder and steam that hung over the battlefield. The human was still cursing and surging against the tangling undergrowth, undeterred by the orc's death. Oak Widow nodded toward him in respect, making no move to finish him. She could feel the seductive whisper of the demon bloodlust, but she would not be its victim. Night elves were made of sterner stuff. She glanced beyond the vine-held human toward the shallow vale. The sun was all but gone, a mere sliver of blood against the darkening sky. Smoke rose from numerous locations, and cries of pain declared that the battle was over for many. Still the sound of steel against steel rang from the growing shadows, announcing that the fight was not yet finished for all. With a slight bow to the struggling human, Oak Widow stepped back into the darkened foliage. In an instant, she was gone, melded with the shadows. When the soldier finally fought his way free and rushed to the edge of the woods, all he found was the faint sound of Oak Widow's mocking laughter on the wind. Oops, I don't know why I keep pushing that. And here we have, actually, that's a straight-up cutscene image taken from the game, and that is, we're on the introduction. So here's where we can skim through some. What do we really need to hear? So what is the World of Warcraft RPG? We'll just kind of glance at the bolds. It's D&D. Warcraft D&D. That is a real thing. I can't believe I missed out on this. And if you play it, this is for you. That's cool. I mean, I'm tempted to kind of look back on this. I don't like that it's 3rd edition rules, but maybe down the line, or you can modify it a little bit. 3rd edition wasn't one of my favorites. Okay, so what's in this book? Chapter 1 will give you a brief history. Chapter 2 is the heroes, which is the largest and meatiest part of the book, probably like the classes. Chapter 3 is adventuring, rules, but most likely magic or the spells. We're just going to glance through those spells and see how they matched up with the Warcraft that we know. Chapter 5, the actual world, some geography, and finally campaigning. That's probably the closest thing they're going to get to a Dungeon Master Guide. This is a picture we've actually seen before from Metzen of the Griffin Rider V Dragon, Warcraft 2. It's a D20 campaign, and yeah, we're just going to... So there are more books we're going to look at right here, so just spoiler alert. We are also going to look at the Manual of Monsters and the Alliance and Horde Compendium, which is basically the Monster Manual and Dungeon Master Guide, most likely. So we have a couple pictures before we... And that's probably where we'll cut it off for this episode. So we'll read these 2 pages of lore, and then this will be the introduction to this, and then we'll stop at chapter 1, where we'll kind of... Because that chapter 1's probably going to be pretty dense. Since it's a history, there will be a lot of things for us to read. Everything else will probably go a lot faster, but we'll read these 2. Gennet had been fleeing through the night, a headlong rush through the moon-dark forest. Branches tore at him, roots tripped him, and his face and bare arms were lacerated with scratches and deadened by bruises. Twice he stopped out of breath, his chest heaving in pain, convinced he could run no further. Yet what lay behind him outweighed any peril that might lie ahead. He pressed on through dark woods. His bedroll and jacket were lost in his flight, along with his long sword and rations. His shirt and pants were torn and ragged, and his boots were tearing away at the seams. His only weapon was a long knife that swung from his belt as he ran. Gennet spotted a light ahead, a hint of red flickering through the undergrowth. Steering by that distant warmth, he found the underbrush diminishing and then disappearing entirely into low rolling hillocks covered by moss and ferns. The trees thinned as well, and at last Gennet stepped into a clearing, a small plaza at the base of what was once some ancient temple to a forgotten god. Though heartened by the light, Gennet was cautious. He had no idea who built the fire and whether they were friendly to humans or to strangers in general. He was not, however, prepared for the beings he saw gathered in the firelight. They were a motley group, a veritable menagerie of thinking beings. A hulking great horned tauren sprawled on one of the rune-carved blocks of the temple. The massive creature raised himself on one elbow to regard the new arrival. 2 elves, one blonde and fair, the other with purplish flesh that seemed to blend into the darkness, broke off a heated conversation and likewise stared at Gennet. A wiry green-skinned goblin tending the fire raised his eyebrows at the sight of the tattered visitor at the edge of the firelight. Lastly, a dwarf reclining across from the elves gave Gennet a nod while placing his hand on the long rifle resting in the grass nearby. The goblin looked at the others and spoke a few words too low for Gennet to hear from across the plaza. Then the short humanoid ambled forward. "Hey, human, what you doing way out here?" the goblin asked, presenting both palms upward, showing itself weaponless. Gennet glanced at the others, noting that the dwarf held his rifle with practiced nonchalance. "I'm a traveler," Gennet stammered. "No. Caravan guard, really. 5 wagons, 5 drivers, 10 guards. We were attacked by demons. I think they were demons. Big winged beasts with red skin, flaming eyes. They were..." He gestured back at the darkness. How far had he fled? "They were back there a ways." The goblin nodded. "Demons, sure. Lots around here. Left over from Kil'jaeden and Sargeras and all the rest. Bad times, you know. Ain't safe to be alone. You hate 'em, right? Fight the demons, if you could." Gennet thought of his allies, locked in combat with the creatures as he fled. His face felt hot with embarrassment, but he said, "I hate the demon spawn. Yes." The goblin nodded again, regarding him with small, bright eyes. "Me and my friends here, we fight 'em when we gotta. We dig round the dark places for the treasure, too. Secrets, power, what's that? I'm the leader. Don't serve nobody, but I speak for all the rest of them. So, what you think? Want to join up?" Gennet regarded the group again and for the first time considered his situation. Alone, lost, lacking supplies, and practically weaponless. A great cat snarled distressingly near in the surrounding darkness. Gennet returned his attention to the goblin. I would be honored to join you." His spoke loud enough for the others at the campfire to hear. Great! Always good to have another set of hands to help out, the goblin said with a huge grin. The dwarf set his weapon aside as casually as he had picked it up. The Taurens sprawled back on the great altar stone, and the elves resumed their conversation, nattering on in tones that suggested it was a long-running argument. A rustle came from one side of the plaza. An orc stumbled forth, his thick arms piled high with firewood. At sight of Gennet, his eyes grew fierce, his brow lowered, and his fang-lower jaw jutted out in a challenge. Hey, this fella's agreed to join up with us, the goblin announced. Yeah, the orc growled in a voice like a rock slide. His small dark eyes took Gennet's measure. Good. Let him get the firewood next time. Okay. What is this picture? Again, these seem to be CGI snapshots. So we're going to read Chapter 1 next time. Chapter 1, World of War. We'll come back on to that. I think what this is also setting up is that in Dungeons and Dragons, you need a lot of races, right? There's a lot of variety there, and there's not the same premise of World of Warcraft, which is conflict, is behind everything. That's not the real premise of World of Warcraft. I mean, of Dungeons and Dragons. It's a little different. It's not a little different. It's a lot different. So you need to set the tone that all of these races and all of the beauty and the variety that comes from having all the options, which is one of the best things about Dungeons and Dragons, is there. And you can still have a party of that. So this is going to be different. And why would it be different? Well, here we see these are more people on their own path, not part of the established Horde or Alliance per se. So that's pretty cool. All right, so I look forward to chomping through the rest of this and just doing at a glance of the rest of this this cool thing. And we see some little heroes here, which, keep your eyes out. You never know what kind of Easter eggs will be out there with World of Warcraft. Again, this is not technically canon, but these are these side issues that we're going to do. Hey, everyone, as always, I appreciate you. I thank you so much for watching and for listening. I hope to see you next time on Lore of Warcraft. This episode, In the Pipe 5x5.